My name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 32 years old, and I work as a financial analyst in Denver, Colorado. To anyone looking in from the outside, my life might look like a success story, the kind of neat package people dream of. But what if I told you that behind the polished numbers, the condo with mountain views, and the career I fought for, there was a family secret that shattered everything I thought I knew? A secret that turned a simple Thanksgiving dinner into the night I finally realized my parents never saw me as their daughter, but as their solution. Sit back, relax, and stay with me until the very end of this story. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you do not miss the next chapter. My days in Denver were structured, disciplined, and safe. I earned $185,000 a year and had carefully built a savings cushion of over $700,000. I never bragged about it, never flaunted it. To me, money was not luxury. It was protection. My condo was modest but entirely mine. Hardwood floors that glowed in the afternoon light, a bookshelf full of novels and finance manuals, and a wide window framing the Rockies. At night, I often sat by that window, sipping a glass of wine, thinking about how far I had come from the small, suffocating house I grew up in. I worked late nights, missed vacations, and skipped countless parties, all for the sense of independence I craved. Independence meant peace. It meant never having to rely on the people who had once made me feel invisible. Growing up, my brother Ethan was the golden child. He was praised for his charm, for his games, for his easy laughter. I was the responsible one, the quiet one who saved babysitting money and studied while the rest of them cheered at his football games. My mom used to say, "You are so responsible," as if it were a medal, but it never felt like one. It felt like chains. I thought I had escaped all that when I built my life in Denver. I thought I had finally carved out a space that belonged only to me. That Friday morning, as I packed my gear for a camping trip in Rocky Mountain National Park, I felt light. I checked my tent for tiers, stuffed trail mix into a bag, and smiled at the thought of hiking with friends, breathing mountain air, sleeping under 1,000 stars. Then my phone buzzed. One short text from my mom. "Come to Salt Lake City for Thanksgiving. We miss you." I froze. I had not been back in 2 years, not since the last holiday where Ethan stole the show and I stood in the background, smiling like it didn't hurt. Part of me wanted to ignore the message, to leave it unread, and head into the woods where the only noise was the wind through the trees. But another part, the part that still longed for family no matter how many times I had been disappointed, whispered, "Maybe this time will be different." What would you do if you were in my place? Would you protect your peace and keep your distance, or would you give them another chance? That was the moment when my camping trip began to fade, replaced by the pull of something heavier, something I couldn't quite walk away from, and I didn't yet know how much it was about to cost me. I still remember the way that text glowed on my phone screen. So short and precise, it could have been a business memo. "Come to Salt Lake City for Thanksgiving. We miss you." That was it. No heart at the end. No warmth in the words. Just a sentence that landed heavy in my chest. For a moment, I just stood in the center of my living room, the duffel bag for my camping trip sitting by the door, like it was waiting to remind me of what I had already chosen for myself. My friends were expecting me in the Rockies. We had mapped out trails, made jokes about who would burn the marshmallows first, promised each other that no phones would be allowed once we hit the campsite. That trip was supposed to be freedom, a pocket of joy carved out from the endless deadlines and fluorescent office lights. And yet, one message from my mother cracked it all open. My fingers hovered above the screen, rereading it, questioning whether it was real concern or another obligation dressed up as love. The strangest part was how formal it sounded, like she had rehearsed it or typed it 3 times before sending it. I sat on the couch and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Memories of Salt Lake crowded in uninvited. The kitchen smelled of sage and butter, Mom bustling with an apron tied too tight, Dad humming while Ethan made a grand entrance just as dinner was served. The spotlight always found my brother, and the silence always found me. I would be the one helping Mom roll out pie crust, setting the silverware straight, watching as Ethan charmed the room with some story about his friends, his team, his life. I had convinced myself I was fine with it, but the truth was that every holiday carved a little deeper into me, telling me my place was in the background. So why was I hesitating now? Why did my heart still ache at the idea that maybe, just maybe, they wanted me there this time? Not because I was useful, not because I was the reliable one, but because they missed me? That hope was like a small flame I kept cupped in my hands, even though I knew how easily it could be blown out. I picked up the phone and called Jess. She answered on the second ring, her voice filled with that familiar warmth. "Tell me you're ready for the trip," she said. I took a breath. "I can't go." There was silence on the other end, then the soft sigh of disappointment. "Family again?" "Yes," I admitted, my voice flat. "Lauren, you know what they're like," she said, her tone sharpening. "You don't owe them this." "I know," I whispered. She hesitated, then said more gently, "Just protect yourself, please." Her words hit me harder than I expected, because she was right. My friends had heard enough of my stories to understand. They had seen the bruises that were never physical, but always left their mark. And still, I could not ignore the pull. After we hung up, I sat staring at the packed camping gear by the door. I tried to imagine myself unzipping the tent at dawn, the cold mountain air filling my lungs, the silence of nature wrapping around me like safety. But another image pressed harder against my mind. Walking through my parents' front door, Mom's arms around me, Dad laughing at some old joke, Ethan actually looking me in the eye without that grin he wore like a mask. I wanted it. I hated that I wanted it, but I did. So I unpacked. One by one, the camping gear went back into the closet. My sleeping bag, my hiking boots, the lantern I had bought specifically for this trip. Each item felt like a small surrender, like erasing a version of myself who had chosen joy and replacing her with the version who still craved approval from people who had never given it freely. When the closet door closed, I stood for a moment in the silence of my apartment. The city outside was buzzing, cars moving along Spear Boulevard, lights flickering in the high-rises across the street. I felt both completely alone and painfully tethered to people who had not called me in months. Not for my birthday, not to ask how I was doing, only now for Thanksgiving. I packed again, this time with different items. A sweater that looked presentable, but not flashy. A scarf that had been a gift from a friend years ago, something that reminded me I was cared for. I chose wine for my dad, a scarf for my mom, a finance book for Melissa. I had spent too much time in the past picking thoughtful gifts that went unnoticed, but still, I could not show up empty-handed. It was my way of saying, I am here, I am trying. As I zipped up the suitcase, the unease crept back in. Why now? Why this sudden invitation after years of distance? The text felt rehearsed. The timing felt off. My gut whispered that there was something more waiting behind that front door than turkey and pie. But hope is stubborn, and I told myself I was overthinking. On the morning of my drive, the city was still waking as I pulled onto I-70. The mountains loomed in my rearview mirror, fading as the miles stretched ahead. The sky was clear, the kind of pale blue that makes everything feel too open. My hands tightened on the wheel as Salt Lake drew closer with every passing sign. Part of me wanted to turn back, to retreat to my safe little apartment, to hide in the life I had built on my own. But the other part, the part that still wanted to believe in family, kept me moving forward. I told myself it was just dinner, just one night, nothing more. But as the freeway narrowed and the Wasatch Range came into view, a chill ran down my spine. Something was waiting for me there, something I had not yet named. And I had no idea how much it was about to change everything. That sense of foreboding stayed with me as I pulled into the familiar streets of Salt Lake, and it only grew stronger as I turned into my parents' driveway, ready or not, for whatever lay inside. By the time I pulled off the interstate, the Wasatch Range towered in front of me, jagged and snow-capped, like silent witnesses to what I was about to walk into. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I turned onto the familiar streets that led to my parents' neighborhood. The houses all looked the same as I remembered, 2 stories with tidy lawns and seasonal wreaths hung on polished doors. It felt unsettling, as if the entire block had been frozen in time, while my life had been forced to move on. When I parked in the driveway, the engine hummed a little too loudly in the quiet afternoon air. I sat for a moment, staring at the front porch I had not stepped on in years. The welcome mat was new, the kind with a cheery script that said, "Home Sweet Home." It looked staged, like a prop in a play. My chest tightened. This wasn't really home anymore. Not for me. It was a stage, and I was walking into someone else's script. Before I could knock, the door swung open. My mother appeared with a smile so wide it looked rehearsed. She wrapped her arms around me quickly, like she wanted to check off a box. "You made it," she said, her voice bright, almost too bright. My father stepped in behind her. "There's our girl," he boomed, his voice filling the entryway. His hug was tight but rushed, like a politician greeting a voter. I could smell the faint tang of wine already on his breath. I handed my coat to Mom, who fussed over it like it was more important than the person who had worn it. The house smelled of rosemary and cinnamon, the scent of Thanksgiving I had known since childhood. For a moment, that smell pulled me back to memories of pies cooling on the counter and laughter bouncing off the kitchen walls. But the warmth evaporated almost as soon as I stepped into the living room. Ethan was there, leaning casually against the fireplace like he had been waiting for his cue. His grin was wide, his posture relaxed, but I knew that looked too well. It was his performance smile, the one that had gotten him out of trouble since we were kids. Beside him, Melissa stood with her usual polished elegance. Her dress was tailored, her hair perfect, her expression pleasant but distant. She gave me a quick nod, her eyes scanning me from head to toe as if she were evaluating a line item on a spreadsheet. "Lauren," Ethan said, pushing off the fireplace and clapping me on the shoulder. "Glad you made it." His tone was too casual, too easy. He looked at me the way you look at someone you plan to persuade, not someone you were happy to see. "Hi," I managed, forcing a smile. I pulled the gifts from my bag. The Pinot for Dad, the cashmere scarf for Mom, the finance book for Melissa. Each one had been chosen carefully, though I had no idea why I still tried. Dad lifted the wine like a prize, Mom draped the scarf around her neck, and Melissa flipped through the book with a polite smile. "Very useful," she said. The words were right, but the tone was empty. We settled into the living room, where the fire crackled a little too loudly, like background noise meant to fill a silence. My parents asked about the drive, about the weather, about Denver. Their voices were cheerful, but their eyes darted, watching me more closely than their questions suggested. I looked around the room, noticing the changes. New curtains in the dining area, framed photos on the mantel that I had not seen before, Ethan at a football game, Melissa at a charity gala, my parents smiling beside them at some community banquet. There were no new pictures of me. Not one. The realization hit me harder than I expected. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was used to it, but it still stung. I had spent the last 6 years building a life I was proud of, yet there was no evidence of me here. No trace that I belonged in this house anymore. Dinner was still an hour away, so we sat making small talk that felt more like a business meeting than a family reunion. My father's laugh came too quickly. My mother's smile lingered a beat too long. Ethan dominated the conversation with stories about his latest project, and Melissa chimed in with remarks that felt carefully placed. The longer I sat there, the more it felt like I was the only one who had not been handed a script. Every gesture, every line seemed rehearsed. My family was playing roles, and I was the audience they were performing for. When Mom suggested we move to the dining room, I felt the weight of it. The table was already set with the good dishes, the golden turkey displayed at the center like a prize. Everything looked perfect, but perfection made me nervous. It always did. I picked at the edge of my napkin, forcing myself to breathe steadily as everyone took their seats. The air grew heavier with every moment. Their smiles didn't soften. Their eyes kept darting toward me. My stomach tightened, and I knew deep down that this dinner wasn't about food or family. Something was waiting just out of sight, and I was walking straight into it. As I lifted my glass to take a sip of wine, I caught Melissa watching me, her gaze steady and unblinking. For a second, it was like she knew something I didn't. That look sent a chill through me, one I could not shake off. I told myself to stay calm, to play along, to act as if this really were just Thanksgiving. But in the back of my mind, a question kept echoing louder and louder. Why now? Why this sudden warmth after so much silence? The answer was coming. I could feel it. I just didn't know yet how much it would cost me when it finally arrived. The dining room glowed with the warm light of the chandelier, every crystal polished, every plate gleaming. My mother had always taken pride in her table, but that night it felt different. The perfection was suffocating, like every detail had been placed not for comfort, but for show. The golden turkey rested in the center on a porcelain platter, surrounded by bowls of mashed potatoes, green beans tossed with almonds, and rolls steaming in a basket. It should have smelled like home, but to me it smelled like a trap dressed up as tradition. We took our seats, my father at the head as always, my mother beside him, Ethan directly across from me with Melissa at his side. The fire crackled faintly in the other room, but in here the only sound was the clink of silverware against china. For a moment I tried to let myself believe in the ritual. I served myself a little turkey, passed the gravy, forced a smile when my mom said, "It feels so good to have you home." But almost immediately the questions began. "How's work these days?" Mom asked, her tone sweet but her eyes sharp. "Busy," I said lightly, trying to keep my answer short. "Busy good or busy stressful?" Dad pressed, leaning forward a little too eagerly. "Both," I replied, forcing a laugh. "It comes with the territory." Ethan jumped in before I could take another bite. "She's always been good at what she does, probably managing millions of dollars every week." His grin was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. I shrugged. "It's not as glamorous as it sounds." Melissa tilted her head, her fork paused midair. "Do you still handle all your own investments, Lauren?" Her question was casual on the surface, but there was an edge to it, like she already knew the answer and was daring me to confirm it. I nodded. "Yes. I like to stay in control of my own finances." "Smart," she said, though the word sounded less like praise and more like measurement. The conversation should have shifted, but it didn't. Instead, it spiraled tighter around me, like they were circling prey. "Have you thought about buying property here?" Dad asked. "It would be nice to have you closer." "You must have a good nest egg by now," Mom added. I felt my chest tighten. Their smiles were warm, their voices even, but the questions dug deeper than they had ever cared to before. For years, they barely asked about my work or my life in Denver. Now, suddenly, it was all they wanted to talk about. "I live comfortably," I said carefully, keeping my tone even. Ethan laughed, setting his fork down. "That's an understatement. Lauren's always been the saver. While the rest of us enjoyed life, she was stacking away every penny. Look where it got her." His words sounded like admiration, but his tone was bitter, almost resentful. I looked at him, searching for the brother I remembered, but all I saw was calculation in his eyes. Melissa reached over and touched his arm, her gaze never leaving mine. "It pays off to be disciplined," she said softly. I picked at the food on my plate, appetite gone. The room felt smaller, the chandelier light too bright, their eyes too focused. Every time I tried to steer the conversation towards something safe, a new restaurant in Denver, a funny story from the office, they pulled it back to me, to my choices, to my security. The weight of their attention was suffocating. I felt like the turkey on the platter, carved open for inspection. At one point, Mom reached across the table and patted my hand. "We're so proud of you, honey," she said. Her smile was warm, but something about it made my skin crawl. It was the first time I had heard her say those words in years, maybe ever, and yet they felt rehearsed, like she was reading a line she didn't quite believe. I forced a smile back, but inside my thoughts raced. Why were they suddenly so interested in me, in my finances, in the life I had built on my own? The unease in my stomach grew heavier with every passing question, every glance exchanged between Ethan and Melissa, every too quick nod from Dad. Ethan launched into another story about his latest project, some new real estate deal that he claimed would be a game changer. He leaned back in his chair, his confidence dripping like honey, but I caught the flicker in his eyes, the way his smile faltered for half a second before snapping back in place. Melissa chimed in with praise, her hand resting on his arm, her tone careful. I sat there nodding, pretending to listen, while my heart pounded louder than the fire crackling in the other room. The unease was no longer just a whisper, it was a warning. By the time dessert was brought out, the tension had thickened into something almost physical. I felt it pressing on me, pressing on the air between us. I took a bite of pie, but it tasted like ash. I sipped my wine, but it did nothing to calm the storm brewing in my chest. I caught Melissa watching me again, her eyes steady and unreadable. Ethan leaned forward, his grin sharp, his words casual. "You've always been smart with money, Lauren. That's why you'll never have to worry about anything." It should have sounded reassuring, but instead it felt like a door creaking open to something darker. As I set my fork down, I realized the dinner wasn't a reunion. It was an interrogation dressed up as small talk. And whatever they were leading me toward, it was coming fast. I just didn't know yet how sharp the blade would be when it finally fell. After dinner, we moved into the living room, the fire in the hearth crackling as though someone had carefully tended it just in time for this moment. The lights had been dimmed, the air heavy with the scent of pine from the garlands strung across the mantel. My parents settled into their seats with a sense of ceremony, Ethan lounging on the sofa with his arm draped behind Melissa, as if he owned the place, and I sat across from them with a glass of wine I had barely touched. Mom clapped her hands together softly. "Let's do gifts," she said with a smile that felt too polished. Her voice carried a kind of cheer that sounded rehearsed, like she had practiced in front of a mirror. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. Gifts had never been part of our Thanksgiving tradition, not really. Maybe something small, a bottle of wine, or Mom handing me a book she thought I might like. But this moment carried weight, a kind of tension that pressed down on me. I reached into my bag and passed out the gifts I had brought. Dad grinned wide as he admired the Pinot, rolling the bottle in his hand as if he was testing its worth. Mom immediately wrapped the scarf around her neck, striking a little pose, and Melissa opened the finance book, flipping through the pages with her perfectly manicured nails. "Practical," she said, offering me a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. I forced my lips into a smile of my own. Then it was my turn. Mom stood almost too quickly and walked to the corner where a small, neatly wrapped box sat waiting. She handed it to me with both hands, her eyes steady, her smile frozen in place. "We wanted you to have something special," she said. The box was small, lighter than I expected. Gold paper, tied with a satin ribbon. My chest tightened as I held it. There was something wrong, something off, but I pushed the thought away. "It's just a gift," I told myself. "Just open it and say thank you." I slipped the ribbon free and peeled back the paper, my fingers trembling slightly, though I tried to hide it. Inside was a plain white box. I opened the lid and saw a folded sheet of paper. My stomach dropped. It was a bank notice. My eyes scanned the numbers, the language cold and clinical. Balance due, $250,000. Loan default. Collections pending. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low, steady, only because shock held it in place. Dad leaned forward, clasping his hands together as though he were about to deliver a lecture. "It's Ethan's loan. The business venture didn't work out." His voice was firm, like he was stating a fact I should accept without question. I looked up at him, then at Mom, then at Ethan, who watched me with an expression I could not read. My fingers tightened around the paper. "And why am I holding this?" Mom placed a hand over mine, her eyes wide with a softness that felt like manipulation. "Because you can help. You've always been the responsible one. You can pay this, Lauren. You'll save your brother and keep this family together." Her words slammed into me harder than the numbers on the page. Ethan finally spoke, his voice smooth but edged with something desperate. "It's just money, Lo. Family helps family. You can't let me lose everything." My heart hammered in my chest. This wasn't a gift. This was an ambush, planned and executed with smiles and pie and wine. I had walked straight into it. Melissa shifted slightly, her eyes gleaming with a calm certainty. "You can do this," she said evenly. "I work at the bank. I know your accounts. You've saved $700,000. Covering this won't ruin you." Her words cut me like a knife. The violation hit deeper than anything else. She had gone into my private finances, stripped me bare without my consent, and now she was using it against me. My skin burned, my breath caught in my throat. I looked around the room at all of them, waiting for someone to object, to say this wasn't right. No one did. They sat there, silent and expectant, their faces tense, their eyes fixed on me. The fire popped in the hearth, the sound sharp, mocking. I set the paper back into the box. my hands shaking now, not from shock, but from fury. No, I said. My voice came out stronger than I expected, clear and hard. I'm not paying this. For a moment, the room froze. My father's smile vanished. My mother's eyes narrowed, her hands slipping from mine. Ethan's jaw tightened, his charming mask cracking. Melissa's lips pressed into a thin line, her calm composure slipping just slightly. I had spoken the one word they had not anticipated, the refusal that unraveled their plan. The air in the room grew sharp, heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken rage. And then, like glass shattering, the silence broke. Dad's hand gripped the arm of his chair, his knuckles white, his face flushing with anger. My mother's voice was low, trembling with restrained emotion. Lauren, don't be selfish. This is your family. But I didn't move. I didn't speak again. My choice had already been made. The box still sat in my lap, heavy with their expectations and their betrayal. I pushed it away, the distance between us widening with every inch. The tension in the room crackled, louder than the fire, sharper than the clink of silverware at dinner. Something was about to break. I could feel it. And the moment it did, there would be no going back. The room seemed to close in on me the moment I pushed that box away. My refusal hung in the air like smoke no one wanted to breathe, thick and undeniable. My father was the first to break. His chair scraped against the hardwood as he leaned forward, his face flushed red, the veins at his temple pulsing. "You're really going to sit there and say no?" he snapped. His voice shook, not with weakness, but with rage, the kind that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. I swallowed hard, meeting his eyes. Yes, I said no. This isn't mine to fix. My mother's expression shifted, her smile gone, her features tightening into something colder, sharper. Lauren, we're not asking for charity. This is your brother, your family. He needs you. Her words were meant to soothe, but they cut deeper than anger ever could. I could hear the manipulation beneath them, the guilt she wanted me to wear like a cloak. But I was too raw now, too exposed, and it only fueled the fire inside me. Ethan's mask cracked next. His easy grin vanished, replaced by a hard glare. Come on, Lo. It's money. That's all it is. You'll still have plenty left. You're seriously going to watch me lose everything when you could prevent it with one signature? I stared at him, stunned by his audacity. You think I worked for years, saved, sacrificed, just so you could throw it all away and expect me to pick up the pieces? His jaw tightened, his voice low and sharp. That's what family does. Melissa finally spoke, her tone like steel hidden under velvet. You're acting like this money is untouchable, like it's holy. But I've seen your accounts. You'll be fine. You can afford this. Refusing isn't just selfish, it's cruel. My stomach twisted with nausea and fury. The violation of her words, the smug certainty in her eyes, made me feel stripped bare. She wasn't just Ethan's wife anymore. She was his accomplice. I set my glass down carefully, my hand trembling. You had no right to look at my accounts, no right to use my life against me. Her lips curved into a thin smile. I had every right to protect this family. The words set something off in my father. He stood abruptly, grabbing his wine glass from the table with a white-knuckled grip. Ungrateful child, he spat, his voice booming now. After everything we've done for you, you stand there and refuse? You sit on piles of money while your brother is drowning? Before I could move, before I could even process, the glass flew through the air. The wine splashed across my face, cold and stinging, dripping down my chin and soaking through my blouse. I gasped, the liquid sharp in my nose and mouth, my vision blurring red for an instant. The shock froze me. My father, the man who once lifted me onto his shoulders when I was a child, had just thrown wine at me like I was an enemy, not his daughter. The room went silent, except for the hiss of the fire. My mother's gasp cut through, but it wasn't sympathy. It was anger turned to ice. She stood slowly, her hands clenched at her sides, her eyes burning into mine. If you won't help your brother, then you are not welcome in this house. Each word landed like a strike. Not welcome. Not daughter. Not family. I wiped my face with my sleeve, my hand trembling but my voice steady when I spoke. So this is who you are. This is what you think love is. A demand, a threat, a debt collector. No one answered. My father glared at me, his jaw locked. My mother's lips pressed into a line, her eyes cold. Ethan looked away, unable to meet my gaze, his shoulders tight with anger or shame. I couldn't tell which. Melissa leaned back against the sofa, arms crossed, a flicker of satisfaction in her expression, as though this was the outcome she had anticipated all along. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the glass back, to tear through the web of lies and expose every secret hiding in the corners of this house. But I didn't. I stood frozen, drenched in wine, the betrayal soaking deeper than the fabric clinging to my skin. The weight of years pressed on me in that moment. Every holiday I had been overlooked, every praise reserved for Ethan, every responsibility placed on my shoulders because I was the responsible one. And now, when I had finally built something for myself, they were ready to strip it away. Not out of love, not out of desperation, but out of entitlement. I took a breath that shook with rage and heartbreak. I'm not your solution. I'm not your scapegoat. And I'm done being treated like I owe you everything just because you call me family. The words broke the silence like thunder. Their faces hardened, their eyes burning into me, but I no longer cared. The wine dripped onto the floor, staining the rug, marking the moment I knew nothing would ever be the same again. My father stood rigid, his chest heaving. My mother turned her face away, as if she couldn't bear to look at me. Ethan shifted uneasily, his fists clenched on his knees. Melissa smirked faintly, her voice low and venomous. You really think you're better than us, don't you? Her words hovered, poisonous, daring me to deny them. But I didn't. I simply stared back, the firelight flickering across my wet skin, my anger burning hotter than the flames. Something had shattered in that room, something that could never be pieced back together. And as I reached for my coat, I knew the next step would decide everything. The choice between staying trapped in their web or walking away forever was no longer a question. It was the only way forward. The November air slapped against me the moment I stepped outside, the cold cutting straight through the wine-soaked fabric of my blouse. My skin burned, my chest heaved, and for a few seconds I just stood there on the porch, staring into the dark yard that had once been a playground when I was little. The swing set was gone now, the grass cut too neatly, the porch lights shining too bright. It all felt sterile, like a stage stripped of props. My hands trembled as I pulled on my coat, though the dampness clung to me stubbornly, seeping into my skin as if to remind me of what had just happened. I walked quickly down the steps, my heels clicking against the stone path, every step echoing in my ears. My car sat in the driveway, exactly where I had left it, but it no longer felt like an ordinary vehicle. It felt like my escape route, the one thin line between me and the house behind me that had turned into a battlefield. Sliding into the driver's seat, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, my face streaked red with wine, my hair clinging to my cheeks, my eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, I barely recognized myself. I had walked into that house hoping for connection, hoping for warmth, but all I found was betrayal disguised as tradition. I turned the key and the engine roared to life, the sound startling in the silence of the neighborhood. My chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths as I backed out of the driveway. The lights from the house glared in the mirror, a reminder of everything I had just left behind. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The city streets blurred as I drove, my vision clouded with tears I refused to let fall. Every red light felt like a test, every stop sign a reminder to breathe, though breathing felt impossible. The silence inside the car was deafening. My thoughts screamed louder than the engine, circling back to the moment the wine splashed across my face, the moment my mother's voice turned to ice, the moment I realized I had been invited not as a daughter, but as a solution to someone else's disaster. I pulled over near Liberty Park, the engine idling, my breath fogging up the windows. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them into my lap just to keep them still. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and for the first time that night, the tears came. Hot, furious tears that blurred the world outside and made my chest ache. This was the illusion I had carried for years, that if I just tried hard enough, if I just kept showing up, if I kept bringing gifts and swallowing my pride, one day they would see me. One day I would belong. That illusion shattered tonight, broken clean by the weight of their greed and the sharp edge of their betrayal. I thought about the camping trip I had abandoned, the laughter I had traded for silence, the freedom I had exchanged for obligation. My tent should have been pitched under a sky full of stars. My boots should have been dirty with mountain dust. But instead, I sat in my car drenched in wine and heartbreak, staring at a city that no longer felt like home. The truth clawed its way into me. They had never wanted me there for love. They had wanted me there because of what I could provide, because of the safety net I had built with my own sacrifice. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was a bank account with a pulse. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the steering wheel, letting the truth sink in, bitter and raw. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to stop excusing their behavior. I stopped telling myself it was love disguised as pressure or care wrapped in guilt. No, it was manipulation. It was selfishness. It was betrayal, clear and undeniable. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, lighting up the dark interior. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, afraid it might be them, afraid it might be another attempt to drag me back in. But the name flashing on the screen was different. It was my grandfather. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the phone. The street outside was quiet, the engine humming low, the night pressing in. Something in my gut told me this call mattered, that it would bring either comfort or another crack in the fragile ground I was standing on. I reached for the phone with a trembling hand, my chest tight, my breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what he was about to say, but I knew whatever it was would change everything again. The phone lit up again in the dark car, vibrating against the leather seat. My grandfather's name glowed on the screen. I hesitated before answering, my pulse loud in my ears. When I finally slid my thumb across the glass, his voice came through low and steady, but I could hear the weight behind it. "Lauren," he said, "are you driving?" I pulled the car into park and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. "I'm pulled over. I couldn't stay there." My voice cracked on the last word. There was silence on the other end, but not the kind that judged. His silence carried the heaviness of someone choosing words carefully. Finally, he spoke. "I saw enough tonight, and you deserve the truth. No more lies." My throat tightened. I didn't breathe. "What truth?" "It wasn't a business loan," he said. His voice sharpened with anger, sharper than I'd ever heard from him. Your brother's $250,000 debt didn't come from a failed venture. It came from casinos, gambling in Las Vegas, luxury cars, trips across Europe. I saw the transactions in the family account with my own eyes." The world tilted. I squeezed the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt. My breath came fast, shallow. "Casinos?" I whispered. "Yes," he said firmly. "And your father knew. He sat at that table tonight pretending it was some failed startup, but I heard them months ago. I heard him and Ethan talking in the den, planning how to cover it up, how to convince you to pay." I shut my eyes, pressing them so tight that stars sparked behind my eyelids. The betrayal tasted metallic, bitter. My chest ached like someone had carved a hole in it. "Melissa, too," he added, his voice thick with disgust. "She's the one who dug through your accounts. She told them exactly how much you had saved. They all agreed it would be easy to guilt you, that you'd fold if they made it about family." My stomach churned. Every piece clicked into place now. The sudden invitation, the probing questions at dinner, the hollow smiles, the staged warmth. It hadn't been paranoia. It hadn't been overthinking. I had been right all along. "They planned this," I said, my voice shaking. "They planned all of it before I even walked through the door." "Yes," he said, steady and sorrowful. "They thought they could corner you. They thought you would say yes, just to keep the peace." A sound slipped out of me then, part sob, part laugh, bitter and raw. "They don't see me as their daughter. They see me as a checkbook." Grandpa didn't argue. He didn't try to soften it. His silence told me he agreed. For years I had doubted myself. I had told myself I was too sensitive, too cynical, that maybe my parents did care, but didn't know how to show it. But here was the truth, laid bare in my grandfather's steady voice. They had chosen deception over love, entitlement over respect. "Lauren," he said quietly, "I want you to hear me now. You were right to say no. You don't owe them this. You don't owe them anything." Tears burned my eyes, but I blinked them back. His words struck deep, cutting through the guilt that had wrapped itself around me for years. I had been waiting my whole life for someone in my family to say that out loud. "They'll try again," he warned. "They'll call, they'll beg, they'll twist the story. But don't let them. They made their choices and now they'll face the consequences. My fingers dug into the steering wheel. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive until the gas tank was empty and the world blurred behind me. But beneath the anger, beneath the grief, there was a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. The mask had been ripped away. There was no going back to the illusion, no pretending things could return to normal. My family had revealed exactly who they were when the stakes were high, and now for the first time I could see them clearly. "Thank you," I whispered into the phone, my voice raw. "Thank you for telling me." "You deserve better than this," he said. "Don't let them make you doubt that." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words filling the space between us. Then he cleared his throat. "Drive safe, go home, get some rest." When the call ended, I sat in the car for a long time, staring out at the empty street. The streetlights glowed against the pavement, casting long shadows that looked like bars across the ground. My reflection in the window stared back at me, eyes rimmed red, face streaked with dried wine. I knew now that I couldn't just move on like nothing had happened. They had schemed, lied, and tried to strip me of everything I had built for myself. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. As I pulled back onto the road, heading toward the highway that would take me back to Denver, my chest felt both heavy and light. Heavy with betrayal, but light with resolve. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't ungrateful. I wasn't selfish. I was awake. The mountains loomed in the distance as I drove, their dark shapes sharp against the night sky. My phone lay silent on the passenger seat, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The fallout was coming. And when it did, there would be no more illusions left to cling to. The first few days back in Denver felt like moving through water. My body went through the motions, but my mind stayed behind in Salt Lake, circling the same images until they nearly broke me. My father's hand clutching that wine glass, my mother's eyes narrowing, Ethan's silence when I said no, Melissa's smirk when she thought she had won. I worked my shifts at the office, smiled in the hallways, typed out numbers and projections, but every moment outside of work, I was unraveling. I told no one at first, not even Jess. I wanted to hold the story tight to my chest like a wound that wasn't ready to see air. But my grandfather didn't hold back. Within days, the truth spread to the corners of the family I had always felt distant from. Aunt Linda called me one evening while I was staring out at the Rockies from my window, her voice steady and deliberate. "We heard what happened," she said, "and we're on your side." It startled me more than it should have. Support had never come so directly from anyone in that family before. I pressed the phone tight to my ear, not trusting myself to speak. "They went too far, Lauren," she continued. "This isn't about helping. This is about using you. And it's wrong." Uncle Mark sent me a message the next morning, short and sharp like him. "You don't deserve this. Don't carry it." The simplicity of it nearly made me cry. While I was slowly piecing myself back together, things in Salt Lake were already coming undone. My grandfather was right. The fallout came quickly. Word spread through the neighborhood, through the church, through every social circle my parents had spent decades building. What had been whispered about Ethan's bad luck in business turned into something sharper once the truth about his gambling surfaced. The numbers were too high to hide. The debt was too large to disguise. My parents tried to spin it. My mother told her book club it was a misunderstanding. My father hinted it at shady partners who had taken advantage of Ethan. But the truth has a way of clawing its way out, and people in small communities notice more than you think. Invitations to dinners stopped coming. Neighbors waved less. Smiles turned brittle and short. The carefully polished image my parents had built began to crack, and once it started, it spread fast. As for Ethan and Melissa, the reckoning was even harsher. The bank wouldn't wait forever, and without me to bail them out, they were forced to sell the house they had bought as proof of their success. I heard from Aunt Linda that it sold for far less than they had hoped, barely enough to cover the debt. They moved into a cramped apartment on the edge of town, far from the glossy neighborhood they had once flaunted. Melissa kept her job at the bank, but her reputation took a blow she couldn't polish away. Everyone knew now that she had crossed a line, that she had violated family trust and professional boundaries. People looked at her differently. even if they didn't say it out loud. Ethan's charm, once his greatest weapon, turned against him. The same easy smile that had dazzled people for years now rang hollow, a mask that no longer fit. I wish I could say I felt triumphant watching all of this unfold. But the truth is, I didn't. There was no joy in knowing they were struggling, no satisfaction in hearing that my parents were slowly being pushed to the sidelines of their own community. What I felt was something harder to name, a deep, tired ache, a grief for what could have been if things had been different, a hollow recognition that the family I had once hoped for no longer existed, maybe never had. Still, there was a small piece of me that felt lighter. For years I had carried their weight, their expectations, their demands. I had bent myself into shapes that didn't fit me, hoping it would earn me love, hoping it would make me belong. That night at the table, when I finally said no, it all broke open. And now, watching them face the consequences of their choices, I knew with absolute clarity that it had never been my responsibility to save them. I put that energy back into my own life. I set up a new savings account at a bank Melissa would never have access to. I checked my credit, froze what needed freezing, and created new boundaries not just on paper but in my heart. Every precaution felt like a step forward, a wall built brick by brick to protect myself from ever being blindsided again. The silence from my parents was deliberate. No apology, no attempt to explain, no call to say they regretted how it had unfolded. And maybe that silence was its own answer. Maybe they had chosen Ethan, chosen the lie, chosen to see me as selfish rather than admit to themselves what they had done. It should have hurt more, but it didn't. For the first time in my life, I wasn't desperate for their approval. I wasn't waiting for them to soften. I wasn't bending myself to fit the role of the responsible one anymore. I was free of that. Still, freedom has a price. It can feel like loneliness. It can feel like standing in the middle of a wide open plain with no one else in sight. I filled that space with routines, with runs along the Cherry Creek Trail, with coffee dates with Jess, with quiet evenings where I read by the window without waiting for my phone to buzz. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore the truth that hung over me. My family had betrayed me once, and they could try again. And deep down, I knew the storm wasn't over yet. The cracks had only begun to spread, and what came next would test me in ways I wasn't sure I was ready for. Back in Denver, my life slowly found its rhythm again. The silence that once felt heavy began to feel like space I could finally breathe in. Each morning, I laced up my shoes and ran along the Cherry Creek Trail, the crisp air filling my lungs, the steady rhythm of my feet grounding me. At work, I poured myself into projects with a clarity I hadn't had before. Evenings were quiet, spent by the window with a book or over dinner with a friend who saw me for who I was, not for what I could give. For so long, I had believed that family was something I had to endure no matter the cost. That saying yes to every demand was proof of loyalty. But what I learned is that loyalty without respect is a trap, and love without boundaries isn't love at all. The night I walked out of that house, drenched in wine and betrayal, was also the night I stepped into my own freedom. I realized that boundaries are not walls meant to shut people out. They are doors with locks, and you get to choose who you let inside. It took me years to understand that saying no is not selfish. It is survival. It is a declaration that your worth is not measured by how much pain you are willing to absorb for someone else's mistakes. To anyone listening who has felt the same weight, who has been told you are selfish for protecting yourself, let me tell you this. You are not selfish. You are strong. You are allowed to draw the line, even if it means stepping away from people who share your blood. Sometimes the family you need is not the one you were born into, but the one you build for yourself through friendships, through community, through your own resilience. I do not check for apologies that will never come. I do not wait for them to change. Instead, I have built a life that is mine. My savings, my peace, my choices. That is what freedom looks like. It isn't loud or dramatic. It is quiet, steady, and deeply fulfilling. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Protect your peace. Set boundaries even when it hurts. And remember, you are not defined by the people who fail to love you well. You are defined by the strength it takes to love yourself enough to walk away. If this story resonated with you, Please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. And now I want to ask you, have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself? What did you do, and what would you do differently today?